Hi, Caleb with Brownells here, and in today's video we're going to be covering something that's been discussed quite a bit and something we get asked pretty often. What's the difference between a red dot sight, a holographic sight, and a prism sight? So regardless of what magnification you're using and anything like that, there are some core differences we're going to go over. First, let's just talk about how they work. So your red dot sight, which will be these three here, I'll kind of scoot those over a bit just to separate them. So these, you're basically just projecting a laser onto a lens and then back at your eye. And that's what you see, that laser is what you line up on your target. Really simple design. So your holographic sights, such as your etched, in this one you're using a laser projected image that is bounced around on mirrors and then projected onto a lens, and a little bit more going on there. But it has its pros and cons, which we'll cover in a bit. A little bit more going on there, like I said. And then you have your prism optics. So on these, the actual reticle is etched directly onto the glass, which has its pros and cons again. And let's kind of just jump into the pros and cons right there. So with all of these optics here, except the prism, so your holographics and your red dots, if your battery dies, that's it, you have no more reticle. But because your prism is etched directly onto the glass, even if you're using battery power to illuminate it, if that battery dies, you still can see the etched reticle, so you still have something to aim with. And this prism optic right here is the 5x magnified. Everything I'm going to say about prism optics is regardless of magnification. Obviously you have prism optics in 1x, that's why we're comparing all these three together. So with that being said, the most affordable, most cost effective is going to be your red dots in most cases. Now I know you can get a really expensive red dot and you can get a more affordable holographic and kind of upset that balance a little bit, but I'm talking about in general here. Red dots are going to be more affordable because the technology is easier to manufacture. Now, another advantage the red dots are going to have are going to be their mounting platforms. So, if you take a look here, you can see that I have a different mount on here. This is a unity mount on this particular red dot, and I can change mounts on this Trigicon as well. There are a wide variety of mounts for different purposes on these red dot sights. And with red dot sights, you can use them not as a main optic, you can use them typically as backups. You can offset them, do different things like that. I mean, they go all the way down to sights this small. Holographics and prism sights, you're not going to be able to get them this small. In fact, the smallest prism sight, this is a pretty bulky prism sight here. The smallest you're going to be able to get in a prism is going to be about half this size. So they're pretty bulky. And then your holographic sights, this etched here, this one is considered a smaller holographic sight. And then the smallest and lighter weight, of course, is going to be your red dots, as I mentioned before. So red dots can be used as a primary or a backup. Your prisms and your holographics, typically those are going to be used as your primary optic. You don't really want to deviate from that too much. I guess in certain setups you could rig a holographic to be a backup, but it would be weird. Don't do it. Just stick with the red dots if you're looking for a backup in that area. So let's talk about another really good feature of your red dot sights is that they're the easiest to shoot with night vision. Now the reason they're easier to shoot when using night vision is because of the versatility of mounts, the reason that there's more mounts. So whenever you're shooting with night vision, you really, in most cases, you need to be higher up off the gun, and it's easier to do that with your red dot mounts. And you can actually get mounts that are just straight up higher versus having to stack risers or anything like that. Now, you can get risers under these holographic etcheds, and you can shoot with night vision on these as well. But the red dot is preferred in most cases because of that. Now, prisms, not the easiest thing to shoot with red dots through, and I'll get into why here in a little bit. So again, night vision, typically red dots is going to be the way to go. Now let's talk about shooting with magnifiers. So if you're going to be shooting with a magnifier, You can use all three of these, but the Prism is going to be the hardest to use, and your holographic is going to be the best to use. So here's the reason why. Your holographic sights, the dot in the center, so a lot of times in your holographics you'll have a dot and a circle, versus your red dots you'll typically just have a dot. So the dot in the center, the size of the dot in holographics can be smaller. So you can get down to a 1 MOA dot on a holographic, which is 1 MOA dot will cover roughly 1 inch at 100 yards. And typically the smallest you'll see in a red dot is going to be a 2 MOA dot, which will cover roughly 2 inches at 100 yards. Now, here's the interesting thing. When you put a magnifier behind these optics, or in front, depending on how you're looking at it, point is the magnifier goes between you and the optic. So whenever you put a magnifier in the loop, what you're going to be seeing here is a more crisp dot when you're looking through the holographic through that magnifier. So another really important thing I want to point out here, and a lot of people are going to argue with me over this, and I'm not a rocket surgeon or the scientist or whatever, so you guys can argue amongst yourselves in the comment section. I'm just providing you with the data. Go try it for yourself. I promise it's true. So if you put a magnifier behind this 1 MOA dot, it's going to stay a 1 MOA dot. Moral of the story here is, if you're going to run a magnifier, the best thing to do it with, or the cleanest thing to do it with, is going to be your holographics. Now, you can run a magnifier with your prisms, but there's a big downside to it. So a 1x prism is kind of like using a scope, okay? You have eye relief, you have adjustments as far as the eye goes and everything, and you have to adjust your magnifier as well. I'm sure any of y'all who've used magnifiers know you have to adjust it and get it set up. So you have to adjust the prism and the magnifier to work together so that you get a nice clear image through the two. And whenever you flip that magnifier off to use that 1x prism, you'll have to readjust that prism to work with your eye again. So it's not a fast transition, so it's pretty pointless to use a magnifier with a prism, unless you're going to have it fixed in one position, in which point you might as well just buy a prism that's magnified, like this 5x right here, and just not worry about it. So again, if you're going to be using a magnifier, just stick with the holographic. So if you're not going to be shooting super far, sure, you can run it with a red dot, no big deal. Alright, so let's get into something else. Something that some of you guys who have eyes that suck. I'm not one of those people. Uncle Sam shot lasers in my eyes and made them better, so I don't know what to tell you. But those of you who have an astigmatism, red dot sights usually don't work well for you guys. You see a really blurry dot, I'm told. I don't know. So in which case, if you're one of those people who have astigmatism, don't even bother with the red dots. Just jump straight to holographic or prism. Those are going to be way more clear to your eyeball, and you'll actually be able to aim and see with those. So that's another point I'd like to make there. Let's talk about some more pros and cons of just the prism, because I feel like that really doesn't get talked about enough. Now, there's been some questions about durability of prism optics I've seen people talk about when going through forums and things like that. Your Trijicon ACOG, the Advanced Combat Optic Gun Sight, is a prism optic, and that is one of the most durable I've ever seen. People say that prism sights have the least durable as far as all the sights are concerned. Let me tell you a quick story. So the first time I got blown up in Afghanistan, my buddy in the back of the truck had an ACOG on his M4. So the blast was under the back of the truck. It crushed both of his heels and threw his gun into the ceiling of the truck, right? And he was muzzled down. When the gun hit the ceiling, it sheared both the pivot pin and takedown pin because it just hit so hard. And I don't know what else happened to the gun in between that, but the ACOG was not damaged in any way, shape, or form. Like it's still being used today. So yeah, ACOGs are pretty dang durable, so I do not question the durability of prism optics at all. So let's talk about a few more pros and cons. So pros to the Prism. Whenever you have an etched reticle, you can put more information on that reticle. So you can have different bullet drop, you know, markings and things like that. And they can be really fine. You can have a lot of detail on those. I mean, you can put whatever you want on the reticle. If you look at different Prism optics out there, they'll have a bunch of different reticles to choose from, and you can get whatever suits your needs. Now, let's talk about running these optics with backup sights. Now, obviously, if it's a Prism, it's got to be the 1X. And any of these optics you can put backup sights on and see through, depending on your mount height, obviously. But the only one that's going to be a bit tricky is your Prism. Because it works like a scope and you have focal plane going on and stuff like that in there, all those, you know, scientific scope words. If you zero your iron sights without the optic on, and then put the optic on and use those iron sights, it's no longer going to be zeroed, which is weird. I know. It makes no sense. So if you're using iron sights with a 1X Prism optic, you have to zero them with the optic on and use them with the optic on. So that's another downside to any Prism sight, which is pretty interesting how those lenses and the scope make that change and work. So I'm sure there's something I missed, guys, but that's the big overview of these optics. Hopefully this will help you choose which one's right for you. And again, if there's any big factor that I did miss, just drop it in the comments down below. I'm sure you guys are going to be surfing through there looking for the madness that is YouTube comment section. So if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button, notification bell, so that you get notified when more stuff like this pops up. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.